I was born 3 days ago. Isn't that interesting? And I know. It sounds crazy, but it is the truth. Then again, I didn't come into this world in a hospital, or even a normal house. No. Such luxuries weren't provided for me. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't even be possible for some thing like me to come into existence in such places. They tend to be too warm, too friendly and filled with love. No. The circumstances of my birth were far less clean, far less natural. And I'm pretty sure the ones responsible for bringing me into this world would run and cower if they ever were to meet me. Which might be one of the few things they and the ones who birthed me agree on. But back to the matter at hand. This small forest, well, the whole area, has been, historically speaking, a very remote and calm place. People who lived here tended to either enjoy the tranquility far away from the hustling and bustling of cities, or they were on the run from someone. There were some families who owned plots of land out here, but they hardly stuck together. Most of their children either went out into the world at large after coming of age, or took over the old, small houses of their parents. The one big road running through the village leads to a bigger one, which leads to another bunch of rural roads, which in the end lead to a small city. Let me say that again. This place here has never been anything but a backwater town, full of people who would rather be left alone. 112, to be exact. That was the number coming out of the last head count. Of course, a few people were missing. Some ran away in time. Others had died or joined some group a few weeks back. Whatever the case, those 112 had remained. Sure, they would be left alone, just like any time before. Since no matter what happened out there in the big, wide world, it hardly ever got to this remote place. But this time, it did. It wasn't some natural catastrophe, though. Not a sickness sweeping the lands, nor some strange weather phenomenon. What happened here is called war. 2 countries going at each other, people dying for ideals and lies they should have never believed in anyway. The whole thing started a few months back, and as the news finally reached this small town, the inhabitants scoffed and shook their heads. Yeah, they were a part of one of the countries in theory, but not a single one of them felt called upon to defend a place that seemed to hardly give a shit about them in the best of times. So they stayed, sure that the whole thing would blow over soon. That maybe they would get some new people who were fleeing from their old place to this remote area. And the inhabitants promised each other that they would let potential newcomers keep their secrets. Because that had been the way this town worked. You don't ask questions you don't want an answer to, was something many of the people here used to say. Well, not anymore. But it does live on, that saying, in me. It's one of the myriad of gifts they sent me into the world with. Anyway, it took the conflict only 8 days before it first reared its ugly head. During a night where the sky was completely clear and the stars were twinkling above, the people of the town heard the first thunder off in the distance. Bombs getting dropped far away, but their sounds woke the men and women here up from their sleep, frightened the children, and made the old couple stare out of their windows. The mood of this place changed with the next morning. Where before, people had almost joked about the conflict. Now, hardly anyone was laughing anymore. There were no more meetings in the only pub in town where people said that they should just declare independence since they weren't involved at all. No more stories about keeping both countries' flags at hand to raise if ever one of the armies came by. No one was laughing about that anymore. But they also didn't give in to fear or despair. The driving force behind that was mostly the old people. Evelyn, a 73-year-old widow, went out at dawn to pick some flowers in the nearby meadows to give to the little children, while others made sure to shush the more vocal people if ever a kid got even close to earshot. Caleb, an almost 80-year-old former teacher, made sure to walk through town from time to time and tell the young men to keep it down from now on. The plan was simple, straightforward. No scaring the kids. The next night came, and so did the sound of the bombs again. Like thunder, Violet, an 8-year-old, thought, while she was lying in her bed. She could feel the tension in the air, had heard her parents whispering stuff to each other whenever she wasn't in the room, and that sound slowly but surely started to take on a new meaning for her. One of dread. A young man, Oscar, brought in a newspaper a few days later. Most of the people scoffed at him as he went around to show the townsfolk what was happening. Some thought it was all a lie anyway, that nothing a newspaper printed would be truthful or accurate in the best of times, much less now. Others simply didn't care. It wasn't like the people here could up and leave anyway. Whatever happened, happened. They told him, and then sent him away. Well, the newspaper did have a few clues in it. First off, the war wasn't going as expected by either side. It wasn't like one of those conflicts where a big country invaded and demolished a smaller one. No. This war was between almost equals, which, according to some of the older folks, meant that it could drag out for years upon years. The next piece of information the people here should have seen was that the front line was shifting now. There wasn't a cohesive battle line anymore. With every passing day, every new offensive, the line blurred and splintered. Chaos was breaking out amidst the armies, which never bodes well for civilian populations. Then again, there really wasn't anything anyone here could have done. Except maybe a few families who could have actually left. But they didn't. People were afraid of leaving this place they had lived in for years, decades. The war could swallow the whole country, but it would never come here, some of the people loudly proclaimed. Well, deep down, quite a few of them knew that that was just wishful thinking. At night, they all heard the bombs, and now they could even see the faint flashes of light. It was still far away, but this feeling swept through the whole town, that it was coming closer, slowly but surely. They all tried to not let it show on their faces, but the tension in the air was growing. People were still smiling at each other, but now they all seemed on edge. Hermes Miller, the owner and operator of the only convenience store in town, left to meet up with his suppliers and managed to get a truckload of cans. He tried to hide it from the people at first, not because he had any ill intentions, but because he didn't want to fan the flames, as he preferred to say. 3 people, separate from each other, came to him as they saw the big truck, and he pulled each and every one of them aside. It was just a precaution, he said. They probably wouldn't need it, just in case something happened. One couldn't be too careful, after all. He'd rather make a loss on those cans in case they weren't needed than see the people of the town go hungry for a single day. And if worse came to worst, he'd even give them out for free, since they were all in it together. Well, the 3 people he had told didn't keep it a secret anyway, but most of the townsfolk believed Mr. Miller. They had no reason not to, after all. Some even felt relief as they heard about it. Anyway, this strange tension in the air didn't let up at all. People here mostly tried to go about their daily lives in a normal fashion, but no one could shake this strange dread that seemed to permeate the air around them now. There was a brawl in the one and only pub one night. It started with 2 youngish guys getting drunk, but before anyone could do anything, half the pub was involved. People were screaming at each other, punching one another, cursing and howling as if they were possessed. It was all a big misunderstanding in the end. A bunch of people, scared and on edge, who finally found something to let off a bit of steam. The 2 that had started the whole thing met each other the day after and apologized, which, in the eyes of the rest of the town, pretty much solved that dispute then and there. I really don't get that. 1 month later, an explosion close by woke them all up, and for the first time since the conflict had started, people seemed to realize what war could really be like. The bomb, dropped from a plane at night, had exploded a few miles away, which sounded far to many of the townsfolk. It was much closer than anything before. It had been dropped there to take out some of the roads and inadvertently cut this town off from the rest of the country. Well, the very next morning, people got together and decided on 3 among them who would go out on foot and take a look. That is how they found out. A giant crater was now where there had been a road not even 24 hours ago. The people of the town were scared because of the explosion, but some of them now felt relief. This bomb hadn't been meant for them. It was just another dumb act of war to destroy something and make life harder for the other side. They didn't even know which country had dropped it or how it would help the war effort. But the town was still here, and still not a target, as far as they knew. So, at least for now, they could go on, the people thought. There still was a way to get to and back from the city, even if their lives were getting harder. At least twice per week, people still could hear explosions outside, sometimes during the day, other times at night. People were slowly getting used to it, though. It is impressive how quickly some can grow accustomed to even the worst circumstances, I think. Even the children were no longer getting startled awake at every drop of a bomb far away. People still had food, still had water, and still could pretend to go about their daily lives. So they put on brave faces and tried to make a show of how little they cared. I think those were the last halfway decent days they had. A week later, after another big explosion, closer than the normal ones, the power was cut. People only realized it the next morning when they tried to brew their coffees and found their showers getting cold very quickly. The old-timers, Evelyn and Caleb especially, told their worried neighbors not to get too scared. Back when they were young, there had been at least one big blackout per year, and people had survived it back then as well. The only difference was, as they all knew that back then, things like storms or floods had washed away the power lines and led to outages. Well, now, it had been done on purpose. Someone might have cut the cables, or they had blown up one of the stations. Whatever the case was, as they also found out, no one was coming to restore electricity to some small town out of the way. With every passing day, more and more people had to come to the realization that no one would be helping them. No electricity meant no refrigeration. But even that problem was solved by the people as a group. Mr. Miller's store had a backup generator, and even though the people were hesitant at first, they put all their perishables into its coolers, marked with names, so no one would inadvertently take something that wasn't theirs. For the most part, people were very careful about that arrangement. Only twice did someone take out more than they had put in. But both of those times, the items were replaced by Mr. Miller. They honestly thought they could survive like that. Together, as a community. 10 days later, an artillery shell exploded in the forest close to the village. It happened just past noon, when people were outside and for the first time they realized how close the fighting had gotten. The explosion pulverized trees and dirt hit the roofs of the homes of the people in the town. Some were screaming and crying before the stench of burned explosives filled the air, like a cloud coming straight out of the depths of hell. It was just an errant shell, some people claimed. Someone must have fucked up their aim. This wasn't meant for us. What a bunch of bullshit. The people were trying to calm each other down, but with every new comment, more and more doubts crept into their minds. Yeah, the shell hadn't been meant for them. They all knew. But apparently, the people fighting were completely indifferent to their existence. One of these days, a shell could hit them. Some people began to murmur, and suddenly the atmosphere inside the town shifted again. The war was coming here. They all knew. From then on, the children weren't allowed to play away from the town anymore. People didn't go out on their own. And even those who had planned on heading to the city stayed holed up in their homes. Plans were drawn up to evacuate the place. Some people wanted to at least send the children away. Violet, the girl that had listened to the bombs dropping from afar, was scared. As were her parents. But no one managed to leave town that day. Nor the one after. Because the setting sun brought with it the first appearance of what would later become the town's demise. A soldier. Just one. Wounded and tired, he stumbled upon the clearing where the houses stood, and immediately radioed in what he had found. This was the beginning of the end of this quiet little town. I know it. Just one person, the mother of one of the children, Gabriella, saw him appear, then disappear. But the news made the rounds in a matter of hours. All 112 people in the town had heard about it before midnight. And they all met in the biggest space they had, which was the pub, to talk about possible courses of action. A few wanted to simply ignore it and continue on with what they had talked about before. Others were speaking of arming themselves just in case. Some wanted to evacuate the town immediately. A small group asked if they should all put up white flags. The town was split, as you can see. Ignoring the soldier and what might come later was a bad idea. Most of them agreed after a bit. As was evacuating it immediately. No one knew where the next battlefield was, and if they were unlucky, they might run straight into two armies fighting each other. Arming people with the 24 shotguns and small hunting rifles they had would be even worse, though. Since Gabriella hadn't even been able to see which army that one soldier had been a part of. They didn't know how to proceed for now, though. So in the end, they decided on the white flag. They made each and every one promise not to provoke any kind of soldier or start any fights if they should appear again. It wasn't like they had done anything wrong, so they were hopeful that even in the event of an army showing up here, they would be left alone. Foolishly, they clung to their hopes, as if their innocence mattered at all. Anyway, it didn't take long for the soldier to return. This time, with his whole company. There were only around 40 men in total, but when they arrived, they all had that look in their eyes, and their weapons were drawn. It was Mr. Miller, the owner of the small store, who came out to greet them. Since there had never been anything like a mayor here, and he had distinguished himself in the minds of the people, he had been tasked with this, as they called it, negotiation. Hermes Miller was afraid. Scared almost out of his mind, he approached the soldiers. He tried talking about how the town had nothing of value, and that they all wanted to leave anyway, but the senior commander immediately cut him off. They were now under occupation, he was told, and leaving the town without express permission would have dire consequences for anyone caught doing so. That was when it all began. Next, the one in charge ordered the people of the town out of their homes and had one of his men count them. They were scared. Some already feared the worst. The senior officer made a point of telling the people that resistance would lead to harsh punishments. And any attack on him or his men would have dire consequences, not just for those involved, but everyone in the town. Then he ordered 4 homes to be cleared out, and all the food brought forth. People murmured, but didn't move. That was the wrong thing to do. The man pulled out his gun and struck Mr. Miller straight to the head before pointing to the first houses at the edge of town. Soldiers stepped forward and began walking toward the places, intent on occupying them, no matter what anyone else had to say about it. I can feel the pain of those 4 families. Of every single member. The confusion, the fear, Only one person tried to stand up to the soldiers, but he got hit with the butt of a rifle before being dragged away. 2 men carried him to the spot in front of the pub and beat him mercilessly, and only stopped once his sobs turned into whimpers. That was the first interaction the town had with the soldiers. They occupied those houses, demanded food even though they had their own rations, looted the valuables, and got drunk on the stolen alcohol. People of the town were scared, as you can imagine, terrified of the cold stares they got. Mr. Miller acted as the go-between, and more often than not, he got back to the people with a split lip or black eye. Some wanted to run away, but they were held back by their neighbors. If one ran, they would punish the rest of the village. So all should run, they said. No, there were children and elderly people around. They wouldn't make it far. Meanwhile, the soldiers got bolder. A few of them sat in the pub all day long, and with the drinks came the harassment. Everyone could feel the tension growing. They all knew what would happen soon, yet no one could do anything to stop it. Mr. Miller tried talking to the one in charge and even got some half-assed assurances, but they all knew that they weren't worth shit. People told their wives and daughters to stay away from the pub or out of sight in general. It was insane, they thought, but necessary. Well, the soldiers realized it too, soon after, and that was when the brawls began. Only one man at a time, while their buddies watched with weapons drawn, making sure that whoever had the bad luck of getting pulled into a fight wouldn't get any help. It was old Caleb's grandson, a boy of 17, who managed to give one of the soldiers a bloody nose and broke one of his teeth, which led to the others beating him in front of the whole town. The atmosphere changed again. People were getting riled up, but it seemed like that was exactly what the one in charge was aiming for. Caleb's grandson was punished further for provoking that fight. They told him to start digging a trench outside town, right on the edge of the forest, so he could calm down. 2 others joined him in solidarity. There still was a small subset of the people who thought that they only had to wait it out a few days longer, that the soldiers would leave soon, maybe take the valuables with them, but let the rest be. They urged the others to just stay calm, keep their heads down, and endure. It's easy to pay the price if it's not your own money, right? Day after day, people were punished and sent to dig the trench. It was getting bigger. 20 steps long, 10 steps wide, and 3 feet deep. Dark murmurs began amidst the townsfolk. Some realized it already. Others closed their eyes to what was about to happen. 2 days later, the one in charge ordered another house to be stormed. There was some flimsy excuse presented, but no one even pretended to believe it. What they found in there was a couple of kitchen knives and an old, rusty bayonet. The men were arrested and the women dragged off. Officially, they had committed an act of aggression by hiding weapons. Mr. Miller tried to intervene on behalf of the people again. But this time, the one in charge made an example of him. He was publicly executed on a cold and dreary Tuesday afternoon, and his last thoughts were with his family. The people who saw it were incensed, and while the bangs seemed to still echo throughout the town, the group finally began moving. They realized that this had all been planned all along. There was no way the soldiers would simply leave on their own. 18 people, men and women, old and young, got the hunting rifles and the shotguns out of Mr. Miller's store's basement. They managed to capture 4 soldiers before the rest of the battalion caught up to what was happening. It began firing indiscriminately into houses. 7 people died, completely unaffiliated with the resistance. Among them, Evelyn. A bullet caught her in the hip, and she died, crying and screaming in her house. Her only sin was living in this place. The fight between the resistance and the soldiers dragged on throughout the day. Even though they managed to take down another 2 soldiers, in the end, the people of the town had to give up. Since the occupiers didn't have to take care of anyone, and they shot up the houses and homes of the people, more and more of the resistance force dropped their guns and surrendered to save others. They wouldn't have won in the end either way. All 18 were executed together, with 2 more who were unlucky enough to catch the soldiers' eyes. Caleb, the old man, and his grandson. All in all, 28 people died that day, most of them in fear and pain. 84 remained. The soldiers stopped playing around. They herded them into the trench and told them to dig. Some with shovels, but since there weren't enough, others had to dig with their hands, scratching at almost frozen ground, while people with guns lined the edge of the trench that wasn't a trench and had never been intended to function as one. They had to dig through the night, old and young, men and women. I could tell you what they all thought about, of the fear and the dread. But it doesn't matter now. The ditch was deep enough. One of the soldiers shouted, just as the first rays of the sun were coming up. 84 people died in a matter of minutes. They were all shot. The few that remained alive but wounded had to watch as the soldiers dragged in the lifeless bodies of the 28 that had died beforehand. 112 people were buried in this place, lying in a ditch, covered up by dirt. They hadn't done anything to deserve this, not a single one of them. But no one came to save them. No one helped when they needed it most. Abandoned by everyone, they were left to die here. Silence fell over the once so lively town as the soldiers marched off, leaving behind empty houses and a mass grave. This is where they all died. But their fear, their resentment, and their pain still lingered, buried in this ditch together with their bodies. 112 people birthed me. I can remember it all. Their laughs, their cries, what what they thought and felt as bullets ripped them apart and dirt got dumped on them. The anger and fear were swallowed by the silence of this place. For now, I am waiting, formless and alone, buried amidst the atrocities those soldiers committed, amidst the things the rest allowed to happen. And one day, I know I will be set free. Someone will come here, maybe pass by, or even stop to find out the truth. They will open this grave and see them and me. And on that day, I will show you all the true extent of our resentment.